Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to this week's Quantum Alignment Show. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with everyone. My name is James and I'll be your host today. I think we have people coming on from Facebook Live at the moment and then people joining here on Zoom as well. So give them a few minutes to arrive. And I have got lots of great material to cover today. So the topic is the core paradox and how it relates to human design. I'm really looking forward to sharing it with everyone. The core paradox with your host, James Wilson. So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more and give you some background about my story. So I'm a certified quantum human design specialist, and I have a business where I do human design readings called Evolving Human Design. My mission is to support others in their overall growth and evolution through principles of human design and general education. My website, if you want to check it out, is evolvinghumandesign.com. And on Instagram, I'm at JamesWilson_evolvinghd. Evolution is a primary component of my perspective with how I teach human design, because as human beings, we're constantly evolving. So I think any system that we work with as a tool also needs to be evolving with us. So I work from that perspective of evolution. And I'm going to give you some details about the background of my story and my life and a little bit about my chart. So here's a look at my chart here. I am a 1-3 emotional authority projector orchestrator. And some highlights from my chart is my conscious sun sign is gate 27, and the theme of gate 27 is responsibility. It's in the sacral center here. So responsibility for doing what's right is a core theme of my life. In the throat center, gate 31 and gate 35, I tend to speak a lot about change, leadership, specifically democratic leadership with integrity and ethics. And I really believe in rotational leadership of we're entering into this new paradigm of mutuality where there isn't gurus and leaders per se, because we all need to share the leadership and equally distribute the knowledge and the power from the way things used to be. I also have channel 2551. It's from the will to the G center. And it's a channel of initiation. This hasn't really played out with like I initiate things like a manifester, but it's more, I've lived it more in that life initiates me into certain things. And I just kind of have to be prepared and open for it and hopefully survive it. As a projector, I feel very compelled to just guide other people and look towards the future of what's possible. A bit about my personal life, kind of beyond the chart, this is a picture of my son. He's 2 years old and he's a manifesting generator. He's emotional authority, so I can keep up with him on an emotional level, but he's kind of wild, so he's all over the place, but I love him to death. And this is a highlight from my career that I like to brag about. I got to work on, before the shuttle mission was decommissioned, I got to work on the last shuttle launch about 10 years ago, and it was really a pinnacle of my career. More recently, I just got back into doing jujitsu. I'm really thrilled about that because it keeps me humble. I pretty much lose every single time, so it keeps my ego in check. And then when I'm not doing all of that, busy with my life stuff, I don't think obsessed is too strong of a word with human design. I just absolutely love doing readings. It's one of those things that time goes away and I just get so immersed in it that I forget what I'm doing. So here's a prepared staged image of me doing a human design reading here. Okay, and then a quick note on the 1-3 profile as well. I mean, this has been, I think the profile comes first because it's such a strong theme. So, and it's like the role in your life as your character. So like your character is your design, whether you're a generator, manifestor, projector, and then the role that you play out in life. This is like your profile. So it's 1-3. I've always found it pretty challenging to sum up the question of tell me about yourself. I mean, everybody loves that question, you know, and I just give a few highlights of all the things that I've done thus far in my life. I grew up dancing and doing performing arts, and I wasn't very good at that, so I got into athletics. Then I enlisted in the military. I traveled to over 30 different countries. Then I studied physics. I got to work for NASA, like I mentioned. Then I studied consciousness. I got an undergraduate degree in consciousness. I don't know who does that, but then I became a meditation teacher. Then I worked in a nonprofit as a consultant. Then I did a graduate degree in IT studies. I worked in a tech startup. Don't recommend it, but you learn a lot. Then I became a father, changed my life completely. Then I started working at a grocery store. Long story. And then I finally became an entrepreneur, and I'm doing what I love and I'm passionate about as a human design specialist. I think that's also encapsulated in my incarnation cross. I have the right angle cross of the unexpected. And so not only is my life kind of unexpected, but because I think I've traversed into so many different disciplines, it gives me the gift of being able to see different ways of doing things. So I don't think it's just for this right angle cross specifically, but the whole, like, you've got to reach 10,000 hours to be successful at what you're doing. I think it's more about experimenting and just doing different things. So 10,000 experiments. It's in a book I read recently by the author James Altucher, Skip the Line. It's a really great book. I highly recommend it. And with the words of Karen, 1-3s lay the foundation for safety and security. And they explore and experience possibility, and then they share their experience with others to protect and serve them. It's definitely been consistent throughout my life. So the purpose of this course that we're going to get into now with the Core Paradox is I'm going to share what I've learned, and hopefully I'll arrive at some reasonable conclusions or consensus. The reason I'm so excited about it is because it's kind of on the leading edge of everything that I think about and theorize, and it's complex, but I like to narrow it down into simplicity as I learn and grow through it. Core Paradox. So I think I've been, as long as I can remember, I've been thinking about this theme. I used to call it the coexistence of opposite values. It doesn't quite have the same ring to it or definite nature of the core paradox. So a couple of years ago, I discovered this term that I think really encapsulates it. If I had to put it into just a few words, what the core paradox is, it's the vehicle to deeply inquire in yourself. So a profound vehicle of conceptual self-inquiry to unify opposite values, because there's sometimes such a great contrast where things are so much on this side and that side, and they don't seem to have a happy medium. So it's all about finding balance in life. And this is going to be more of the, dare I say, scientific perspective behind that, of what's going on in your fundamental core nature. So what we'll cover is what is the core paradox more in depth through illustrations. I'm a very visual learner. And then that's how I like to convey things as well, through imagery and visualization, to make it more simple, to get to the point, really. Then how it relates to everyday life, because anything simple also needs to be practical in order to have it, for it to have relevance in your life. And then what are the connections to human design? That's where it really comes to life. And then I'm going to go into the Core Tridox, because actually everything that's paradoxical is really a component of 3 different qualities. That's a tridoxical nature. And then to bring it home even more to everybody listening and all of us of what this actually means, I think that it gives a new perspective and sheds different light on what's actually going on in ourselves on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment kind of basis. So I'll link it all to the nature of the mind, the body, and then perhaps the ego. These are some disclaimers that I give. I typically give these in my human design readings, but I think they're applicable here. Mutuality, as I mentioned, I feel very, very passionate about this because we're all awakening right now and realizing that we're truly the leaders of our own lives and we're all our own leaders. It's a new field of awakening that I personally call it mutuality, and I've heard this term and it just seems to fit. So nobody is any better or worse. We're all just living out our own truths. Okay, this doesn't really apply right now, but in my readings, confidentiality is an important component of that. Complexity all the time with human design, or what I'm going to be covering today. If it feels too complex, that's usually a byproduct of thinking about it too much. And really, it's about getting to the simple realizations that are within the complexity. And then fourth, along with that, critical thinking. I'm a big advocate of critical thinking, always checking with your own truth. Does this align and resonate with you? Okay, these are some claims that I'm going to make about the core paradox, some claims or assumptions. I'm claiming that humans are inherently paradoxical and that life itself is inherently paradoxical as well, and that's not wrong. That's not something that's wrong. Even though it's complex, it's something that you wouldn't want to change because fundamentally it can't be changed if inherently the nature of life and human beings is paradoxical. I'm also stating that there is a core paradox. That's kind of obvious, but you can think of this as like that there is the very first paradox, to bring it back to its origins of where does the first paradox arise from? And that I'm claiming that that is the essence and the foundation of your very being. And only paradoxical beings, human beings being paradoxical in nature, are able to meet the paradoxical demands of the world. And it's our lack of understanding about paradoxes that results in suffering. So in the work that I do, I see unnecessary suffering, and I feel that it can all be traced back to a lack of understanding about what paradoxes really are. Because I think they only exist in the mind. So understanding your paradoxical nature can justify the suffering that's in life and provide a more stable foundation or ground to move more effectively into your life. These aren't new concepts. These have all kind of emerged from really profound readings of novelists Friedrich Nietzsche, Carl Jung, and Dostoevsky, who I recommend. Okay, what is it? I'm going to start really, really simple because I think it's going to start to get complex the more I go into the physics and the quantum mechanics behind it. So stay with me here with a paradox. Para meaning two. So the very first thing you need is two things to set up the initial conditions for what a paradox is. So two things, and I'm going to use examples that everybody knows, which is the yin and the yang. I don't know about you guys, but that's the first thing that my mind usually goes to about two opposite values. So the yin and the yang, it's the one and the two. And then core, so core of paradox is they present as one thing when you combine them and put them together in a symbol, right? So we would look at this, you would look at that and say, that's one thing, that's the yin and yang symbol. I know it looks like the Pepsi symbol a little bit, but don't think about that. And I know it doesn't have the corresponding dots in it, but I'll get to that. I'm keeping it basic here. So even before that. So core paradox is singular, presenting as one thing, but it contains two. So right there you have a paradox. This symbol presents as two, but it's also one, depending on how you look at it. So two emerging from one, or one giving rise to two. And really it's the story of how one becomes many, how the unmanifest becomes manifest. Core paradox, two things presenting as one thing. And this, you can extrapolate it to anything in your life, but this is the basis of it, that if you're wondering, is it this thing or that thing? Do I do this or that? It's usually somehow it's both. And this is for my visual people here. So you've got unity of one, right? And then it splits off, and splitting off this is the fundamental point that I'm going to be working from today. Is this split is what happens. So the two split apart, and the core paradox, you could translate it more to how it's experienced in life as the core split, that term. So something split from the original one. And then this is where I'm going to get into, is that this ultimately becomes the human being, because the human being is the embodiment of this core split, core paradox. We contain within us these two opposite values. Because human beings, as I mentioned in my first claim, human beings are paradoxical in nature because we contain the yin and the yang and two opposite values, but we're just one thing. Okay, so now get ready for complexity, but I'm going to break this down and make it very, very simple as well. So this is called a unified field chart. It would be the same as a quantum field chart. It's typically the term used in quantum human design, is the quantum field. So I think for the most part, a couple of years ago, really talking about the quantum field wouldn't have been really possible, the same way that talking about meditation was abstract to people, but this is becoming more and more of a concrete reality. So to make it more simple for you guys, is if you were to zoom in on the unified field part here, which just kind of looks like nothing, blank. Sometimes it's talked about a quantum ocean or a field of ocean of consciousness. If you were to zoom in on it, it actually doesn't contain nothing. That gets even more into spirituality and philosophy of, it isn't anything contained within the quantum field because it has not become manifest yet. So it's not an actual, you can't really speak of it as if it were a thing. However, when you get into the depths of quantum mechanics, there's very complex equations and mathematical algorithms, and even the original text from all of the Rig Veda from the Hindu traditions is said to be contained within the structures of the unified field. So if I had to put words to it, I would call the quantum field just a reverberation of sounds of nature. So for purposes of today, we're only going to be dealing with the physics part of the chart, not the whole unified field. But we're going to focus on these two fundamental quantum particles that behave more like fields. So before we can even identify quantum particles, they emerge out of the quantum field as either bosons or fermions. These are considered the first two fields that emerge. So again, we're dealing with the one and the two, the yin and the yang. These are two of the most fundamental manifest opposite values that modern quantum physics has discovered. So they're responsible for two paradoxical qualities. Bosons, they uphold order, and then fermions create disorder, right? So here we've set up the paradox in physics. So everything is ultimately an interaction between the boson field and the fermion field. And what that looks like here, to draw it out, is that from the quantum field emerge down here the bosonic field and the fermionic field. Bosons, it's like gravity forces that contain order and orchestrate everything perfectly. And then fermion fields, it's all about disorder. So same thing here, the yin and the yang. There's the wholeness in the quantum field. And then the two emerge as the yin and the yang. And then it all mixes together, and that's when it starts to get complex. You have quarks and leptons and up quarks and down quarks and neutrinos, and who knows about that, but that's not the point. It's almost like the complexity of a human being, that we're all infinitely complex and we're all just looking for our own internal tranquility and simplicity. So I'm going to gradually step into how this relates to the human experience more and more, but I wanted to make that clear about this is the underlying mechanics, that the more and more the unmanifest and the two opposite values of these fields coalesce together, it gets complex, but then it creates things that we actually experience with classical physics, nuclear physics, atomic physics here, and the interaction. It's really about the interaction of the two. And this is where it starts to get tridoxical. And then it gives rise to things that we all know about: electronics, material science, computer science, laser technology, physics, all that. What you call manifest reality. So that's the third component. Okay, this is where it gets kind of fun, because then you can come up with all of the polarities in life that seem to have no unification to them. And bosons and fermions, that's just another abstract term, but you can link them to these contrasts in life. So there's order and disorder, or yin and yang, or unity and diversity, light and dark. I think we all experience that in our life, of our light aspect and then some shadow work and dark work, and then they're both contained within us as humans. I personally like the traditions from the Tao, from Taoism, and the two paradoxes in Taoism is the Wu and the Wei. So Wu is non-action and Wei is action. So the phrase is Wu Wei Wu, which is taking action without action. So it's like silent action. So silence and dynamism. And then in the Hindu tradition, absolute silence is the Purusha quality of the unified field, and absolute dynamism is called Prakriti in Hinduism. And then these things get anthropomorphized into deities, and this tells the story of, I think you can trace back any culture's deities to this. So in Hinduism, it's Shiva, which is absolute silence as well embodied, and then Shakti, so Shiva Shakti. And then these things are becoming more and more relevant and practical to us, of infinite and soul and body. And this is where it starts to come into light with human design, the human experience, is that these are two, you could call them polar opposites that we feel. There's a pull towards, I want to live out my soul's purpose, but I also have the demands of my biological existence and the limitations of my body. So soul and body. And then really when there's a divide, a lot of times it's my perspective or your perspective, and then the other person's perspective. And sometimes they can be completely at odds with each other, but it's about finding the middle ground. And then you get into the same dynamic, to break it down simply. So yin, yang, bosons, fermions, these are the fundamental building blocks of reality. They mix together, and then it's what they create when they interact with each other. Then they create all of the actual particles that can be observed into the yin and yang that we know and experience. Okay, I'm in for time, about halfway, that's good. All right, so hopefully that's clear, the boson fermion field. And then at the So core, I'm going to bring it back to core paradox. So core is singular or one. So starting from one, there's the core, the paradox of both fields, and then the complementary opposites construct reality, the interaction between the two, and create a tridoxical reality, which is the human design chart. And so this is where it comes up, where we can actually work with it, analyze it, see where it shows up. But this is what the perspective I like to share about where it's coming from. Now I'm going to make it a little bit more personal to how this is on the feeling level, and where I think it is the less understood source of suffering. Because to make it more like a felt experience of oneness, I mean, I think that anybody who's involved in this type of work or a spiritual quest or looking for more has a concept of awakening into, and I always had this question of awakening when I started on a spiritual path, and when I see, depending on where people are, again, this is mutuality at play, that in terms of spiritual development, nobody's ahead or behind anyone else, because who knows how long people have really been around and evolving, you know what I mean? So, but anyways, there's this question of awakening, and what am I awakening into? Like, because it always feels, even though I know it's not goal oriented, it kind of still feels like there's a goal, right? Like, what's the point of this? What's my motivation? What am I looking to achieve here? And that's what's a paradox. It's like there's no goal, there's no end to the path, but ultimately where I'm at in my life now, and what I see and what people are looking for in this kind of work is wholeness. So the awakening into a feeling of feeling more whole. And so this is where we start from. So we start from a place of wholeness. And then the core split, I think, is a more personalized feeling of this connection that we have to the universe, but somehow as it emerges more into us and our beingness, it gives us this feeling of not being whole, because there's the split. I mean, I don't know how to simplify it anything more than that, other than it seems to reflect this phenomenon of core split. Something in me feels off. I don't feel whole anymore. I need to feel more whole. And then even more expressed, we start to internalize it and personalize it into something's kind of missing from my life. I don't know what it is. And then there's a whole narrative in the mind. So this is where hopefully it's coming out of the abstract from the physics of the underlying mechanics into this whole narrative that seems to exist in the minds of everybody. We're all kind of connected to this cosmic mind in a way, and it tells us something, or the way that, as I mentioned in my claim, that the suffering comes from not understanding the paradox and it being in the mind. So the mind makes up all of these stories from that initial feeling of something was split. And it says something must be wrong with me. And I feel this internal void. And then I have to heal this. And the needing to heal it part, let's hold that thought because it's on my next slide. But that's the problem, so to speak, that this can create, is feeling a need to constantly heal something. That feeling of needing to heal doesn't go away even when it feels like everything is kind of in place and in order and fixed, so to speak. But I'll get into where I think that comes from a little bit more. And it really comes from biology, because it's in the understanding our biology. So human design, I think, is a framework to understand our biological complexities. Okay, so that I have to be better, I think, is based in evolution itself. And that's why I work from the basis of evolution, that ultimately we're being informed by the force of evolution itself. And we interpret it in the mind as, okay, universe, I keep hearing from you that I'm supposed to be better and I have to do better. And when will it ever be enough? And the same thing, you can always trace it back to that feeling of I'm not enough, I need to be better. But I think it's rooted in this core paradox. So in my many years of studying Vedic literature, it seems like Sanskrit phrases seem to give a practical understanding of what the mind is actually doing and how it's interpreting nature. So our intimate relationship with nature, and the term in Sanskrit is pragyaparad. It's simple, and all it means is that your intellect is mistaken. It's a mistake of the intellect as far as what the message actually is. So what it is, and again, this is an ongoing experience for me, but it seems to be that when you get rid of all of the complexity and you come back to the foundational principle of, on the assumption that we're all conduits and connected to the unified field, to the quantum field, it speaks through us. So we're a conduit for it. And that impersonal phenomenon of being connected to the quantum field, it can't be healed. And I think that this is where the suffering comes from, is that ultimately you get to a place of something that cannot be healed anymore. It can only be understood and experienced, and come to an awakening or a realization that there are certain things at a fundamental level that cannot be healed, and they don't need to be healed, and they don't need to be fixed, because it's your lifeline to evolution. And it's kind of mean sometimes, because I think the divine, to put it that way, gets it's probably one of the most polarized paradoxical things, because you could speak about it from one perspective that it's just divine love and it's here to serve us completely. But then there's the other component of nature and the divine that doesn't get talked about quite as much, but it's destructive. It's really impersonal. It doesn't care about you in the personal sense, because it has a will of its own. And this is the destructive quality of nature that it has. So when we have those within us, divine love and divine darkness and evil. And let me make my point here. So personal. These are all the personal dynamics that are justifiable to be actively engaged in this kind of work of healing, whatever it is that needs to be healed on a personal level. But I think, like any journey, you get into a rabbit hole, and at a certain point, for all intents and purposes, you resolve and fix and heal everything on a personal level. But that feeling of the core paradox can also be called the core wound, to personalize it. If it could be healed, I think we would have figured it out by now. But as far as I know, it's not meant to be. It's just a misunderstanding. So when it's impersonal, this is where awakening happens. Of these impersonal aspects can't be healed. So there's no end to seeking, but I think that at some point you find the answers. And I think that anybody who's wanting to do good in the world is looking for answers for people. And this is the answer that I feel most compelled to share, is that you can't heal certain things. And at a certain point, you can be doing yourself an injustice to continue to try and heal them, because ultimately nothing is wrong. And it's now you're in the paradoxical nature of the mind that's misinterpreting what's actually going on, which is now you're in the flow, the actual flow of evolution. And so it's just going to nag at you and tell you to always be better, because that's the fundamental nature of life, is to constantly grow and evolve. It just, that part of it doesn't end. And my claim here is that you wouldn't want this core wound at the basis of your being to be healed at all, because then you would lose your connection to evolution itself. It's your connection to source. You want it to be there. Okay, this is further out on my current understanding of it, so to speak. But I think that when you get really deep into self-work, a lot of times it can feel like it might come from before you were even fully conscious and aware, and that those are almost the memories you feel like you have to go back to. And so the core split in our most personal lived experience of this lifetime is being split from wholeness the moment we were born and incarnated, or kicked out of heaven, you could say. And that feeling of like, I kind of want to be back home, and a feeling like a longing for home. I don't know where to take that, but that's just my current thought on where that feeling ultimately comes from. It's that we're born into the world, and by the age of 5 or 6 or so, on a psychological level, there's a feeling of that it just grows and grows from there, of like something's wrong, something's off fundamentally. But I think the core paradox, it sheds light on, there's problems in life that we all encounter that are hard to explain away, because they happen and they're difficult. But at the core of who you are, there's nothing wrong. There's no problem. And so then it becomes a journey from that point of living fundamental wellness and knowing that you're fundamentally well. All right, so the core paradox defined, now that we've kind of gone through that journey, now I'm going to get into the nature of the mind, body, and the ego here. But to recap, so core is something that's central, it's fundamental, it's fundamentally important to understand this one thing. And I'm not making the claim that this particular view that I'm speaking about the core paradox, is that one thing. But I think anything simple that's causing you problems or complexities in your life, you can ultimately trace it back to one core fundamental thing of its inception point, of where it started, to be able to actually see it and understand it for what it truly is. And it's usually based in some sort of paradox that seems completely ridiculous or contradictory. But that's why I called this a vehicle of profound self-inquiry, that with these principles, it can point you in the direction of your truth. So it's not my truth, it's not this other person's truth, it's your truth coming from the paradoxes that exist in your chart. I mean, that's why I love doing human design, because it's the only way that I can actually speak to it in a pragmatic way of looking at a chart and going, okay, where are these core paradoxes potentially showing up in us? Because I have them too. All right, so in the chart, hopefully you've all followed along with me so far. So when I do readings, I can't help but analyze it in terms of, where are the paradoxes coming from that seem to be causing problems, that are ultimately leading us in the direction of our truth. And this is the first place I see it usually, is the black lines, which is soul purpose, and red lines, which are life purpose. So a lot of times people come to readings and have a question of purpose, like, what's my purpose? What am I supposed to do? And talk about complexity, because when you look through the framework of human design, that's a tough question, because you really are just full of purpose. Like the chart, every component of it is purposeful. Everything in itself could be a life or soul purpose. But I see this as the basis for what I talked about with the core paradox. So these two opposite, seemingly opposite values of my soul is dragging me one direction, and then, but then the demands of my life and getting a job and paying the bills and all that seem to be the diametrically opposed with each other. So contradictory, but how that actually plays out, how that manifests in life, I say then starts to reflect more of the tridox, the core tridox, because you have your life purpose and your soul purpose. I mean, hypothetically, you could follow just your soul purpose, but that paints this picture of renouncing your entire life and just living reclusively and just following your soul, or your life purpose, which is just soul crushing and boring. But they're both important. So it's this interaction between the two that create the reality of what you actually end up doing, and why human design specialists can, I think, really be good guides for, pointing out these different purposes, and then you decide, and it all comes back to strategy and authority of, through all this complexity, ultimately you have the answer, and your strategy and authority is your personal guide of, then what do you actually do? And then that's the reality of what you live out. So I say human beings live this core tridox as a core split, which can feel, like something's fundamentally wrong, but just know that in yourself, you're fundamentally well. All right, I got some time here. So understanding ourselves more deeply, I think, is what makes life a little bit more easy and hopefully more graceful. So understanding of the chart, in my experience and people that I work with, and I love to see these realizations that people have of a deeper understanding of the chart itself directly can lead to a deeper understanding of yourself without all this complexity of physics to go along with it. So the mind, so I'm going to go into next. So the nature of the mind. Early on, I worked as a meditation teacher, and I think that just about everybody that came wanted to get rid of their thoughts. And I don't think that's possible. And similar to the core paradox and everything that seems problematic, I don't think you would want to. I don't think that's the actual reality that anybody wants to live. But understanding what the mind can be used for, I think, is the real question people have of understanding the fundamental nature of the mind. So in light of what we've just spoken about, this is my deepest understanding of it, as far as the mechanics of what the mind's doing. So the mind is attempting to navigate all of this complexity that's going on in the body. And the mind, it serves us very well, and it's always trying to know. So it's reaching and striving to know the unknowable. But I really think its fundamental nature is that it's unable to actually know the truth. So what it does is it tries to make up stories, because something happens in the body, good or bad, indifferent, whatever, and it's like it either twists or untwists. And I think it's a process of just stress release or purification of some kind, and that it's abstract. So the mind doesn't like abstract things, and it tries to, but it can't have a mood or tell a story on an abstract basis. So that's, I think, the fundamental teaching of the mind is the mind cannot have a mood on an abstract basis. So what it does to cause problems is it makes up some story of, oh, this happened right now, and it's because of what happened when I was 5 years old, or it's that guy, that's whatever. It's this apparent problem, but it's something that happened that it's so complex, and who knows when it happened, So the mind can't know the truth, but it's the problem of the intellect. Again, pragya parad, going back to that phrase of mistaken intellect. It wants an answer. It wants to know what exactly was it this or was it that? And really, the knowingness only comes from the body, or feet on the ground, as I like to say. And then as far as how we move forward into life, despite those complexities or problematic situations, coming back to decision and strategy and authority. And even this is true even for mental projectors. I get that a lot, that you're not making decisions from the mind. It's all about clarity. So you're making decisions from mental clarity, which it's esoteric, but I think it comes from more of a felt sense. That's not from the mind. The nature of the body is to know. So it's tuning into the body. And I find that working with the chart and really honing in on discernment of where this is coming from. It's a paradox because it's coming from a knowingness in the body, and it's specific to each person. So I don't have generalities for it, but if you have emotional authority, as I do, if you have splenic authority, sacral authority, self-projected, egoic authority, mental authority, reflector, lunar authority, all that. So it's where it's coming from. And the paradox, I think, is whatever it is, whatever that message you're getting, you pick it up in your mind as a thought. So it feels like it's coming from your mind, but it's discernment, careful discretion, discernment of where is this actually coming from. So I really think that working with human design specialists can be an opportunity to tune in to asking yourself, where is this coming from? And to get clarity from there. Okay, I think I'm doing good for time. Got 10 minutes here. All right, the ego. This covers, so mind, body can seem at odds with each other. So those are the yin and the yang in this analogy, and they can seem very much at odds with each other. I don't think I have to explain that too in depth. And then the interaction between the two is what I think you could call your ego. It kind of wrestles and battles between the mind and body. I cover this more in my readings, but what I have discovered and what I say about the ego is that there's a deep desire, I think, in spirituality to want to like destroy or get rid of the ego. But I think you actually can, to be honest with you, but it's really hard work. I think you have to give up a lot of your life, and I'm pretty sure that it just comes back, and usually even stronger than the first time. So you really need it. It's essential because it's the phenomenon between your two paradoxes. It's trying to protect you. It's there to serve you, and it regulates the mind and body dynamic into hopefully more of a harmony. So it's very strong for that reason. It's like your protective mechanism, but working with it, it's actually kind of afraid because it knows that it doesn't exist ultimately. All right, I put this slide here for my cue to kind of wrap up and start to go into questions. Again, my website, if you'd like to find out more or schedule a reading, is evolvinghumandesign.com. One of the best ways to stay in touch with me is through Instagram. I'd probably respond to you there most likely at JamesWilson_evolvinghd, which I have misspelled here, but it's evolving HD. Some of the services that I offer are level 1, 2, and 3 readings. This is the information that we'll go over in your chart. And then I also offer follow-up sessions to clarify anything or just speak about the experience. And so for 2 weeks until May 15th, I'm going to be offering 20% off of all of my services. And if you enter the promotion code HD20, then you can get 20% off any of my readings. So that kind of wraps up my spiel, but I've got time. Cindy, I think I have time for questions, if you have any.
There were a couple questions that came in. Going back, there was a question that came in that said, when you were going on the physics diagram, that many people thought that Shiva order yin versus Shakti disorder yang. They always understood that Shakti was the yin aspect and Shiva the yang aspect. But it's still opposing out, still a paradox, right?
Well, it's kind of
Or
the beauty, I think, of paradoxes, that you don't necessarily have to have it one way or the other, even though there are definitive answers. Shakti, I don't, has a very visceral feel to it of Shaktipad, or it's talked about a lot with darshan, of just feeling somebody's Shakti. And I could have that backwards, but that's my understanding of it, is that it's the more active quality. But touche, it could be. It might be right.
so a question. So if the ego is afraid, do we want to try to let it know it doesn't have to be afraid? Or do we want it to stay afraid because it motivates us to regulate mind and body? I know I tend to want to get rid of or work through fear so it doesn't define me. What do you think? Do we want the ego stay afraid so it motivates us, or do we want to try to help it not be afraid?
So I think when discussing anything that is based in fear, I don't think that facing it or even working with it is the approach that I would recommend, because that implies some sort of overcoming, or what I put in the category of trying to fix, as if something were wrong. So I don't think on that level, that's how I would approach it. I would say that it's something that you want to meet, and you meet it in order to see it for what it really is. So it's a misunderstanding of the mind. If there's fear there that's present, it's something that your mind has misinterpreted in some capacity. And when you meet it on the level of what it actually is, it's when it dissolves, and it's no longer a factor in the same way that you thought it was. So I think that dispelling fear comes only from not necessarily meeting it head on, or any kind of fighting with it or aggressive kind of way. That's more of a reaction. And so it's meeting it and seeing it for what it really is. And I think that ultimately, and that's why I love this concept of the core paradox, is that ultimately it's on some expressed level, it's going to feel like fear, and it can feel very real. So I'm not dismissing that. But ultimately, I think that anything can be traced back to a connection to evolution and source itself, which is based in love. So it's something that's some message of love for you that's being misinterpreted as fear.
There was a question from Tracy. Embracing the paradox helps us feel whole.
That's been my experience of it. I don't have a lot of words because I've used up most of my words so far, but I would say that that's its primary motivation, is to bring about a feeling of wholeness, of seeing and of the paradox and unifying it within us. Yeah, that's its goal, so to speak. The core paradox is to awaken into your wholeness.
James, on Facebook, we had a question. Are there any charts of the enlightened souls like Adida or Ramana Maharishi analyzed of how their wake up happened in cohesion with activations and transits that you're aware of?
So the question is, are there charts for maybe sages or saints like Brahmana Maharishi who we can look at to see? What was the last part about?
Well, that they were, the question was because they had an awakening time.
Because they had what?
They were wondering if there was if anyone has done any research, or if you'd done research into when their awakening was, if there was a transit or an activation that helped with their awakening. or
Okay.
it might have.
Okay. All right. So I think this answer might be a little bit controversial, actually very controversial. That the stories about gurus and saints, not to discredit them in any way, and I only say this because I think that the new paradigm that we're in is a new potential for enlightenment, and that that type of enlightenment that's spoken about with gurus and I don't think that it was an embodied awakened experience per se. I think that it was all about renunciation and merging and identifying yourself with consciousness to kind of leave the body. They always talk about leaving the body and dropping the body and becoming awake and enlightened. So that's one form of awakening, which, again, I don't discredit it or think that it didn't happen. I only think that myself, of what I speak about and how I work, is not on that basis. I don't think it's about trying to leave your body. I think it's awakening into your life and your body. So I actually can't speak about that so much, other than I don't think somebody else's path. I would say I think I would encourage people to follow their own path.
Oh, thank you. Jules had a question. She said, I have the channel 1222 and the channel 4037, which is a conundrum. The need for community and the need to isolate and be on my own resonates more than wanting community. I'm wondering if this is a paradox in my chart and how it could serve me. Is allowing a paradox basically allowing a balance and not getting emotionally involved? Or
so there's a paradox of feeling pulled in two directions, of wanting to kind of be on your own a little bit more and reclusive. And if you phrase it in such a way as a paradox, and with the gates specifically, I think that the corresponding gates can also shed light on kind of that tug and pull of two different ways. Because I haven't met anybody or worked with anyone that feels that way all the time, 100%. So it's honoring both aspects of yourself. So you might feel, at one time in your life for certain periods of time, just to kind of be more isolated in a way. But once you've recharged and you've centered yourself, I would be willing to bet that there's the other end of the spectrum, which is wanting to engage with life and experience life more. So yeah, it's honoring those two parallel parts of yourself that I think would be a good direction.
well, thank you. One final question that came in, and then you could wrap up. But Sunny was asking, she came in late. She wants to know if you'd share again your type profile.
Oh, sure. I'm a 1-3, which in traditional human design is the investigator, which is the 1 line, and then the 3 line is the martyr. I've certainly martyred things in my life, unfortunately, and learned a lot. And then in quantum human design, a different phrasing, the 1 line is the resource, so someone who can bring resources from what they've learned. And then the 3 line in quantum human design is the explorer, of wanting to explore. So if you have either 1 or 3 in your profile, you might relate to this. I got all my thoughts out there. I just want to thank everyone for watching today, and please get in touch with me if you have any more questions or things you would like to talk through. And it was an honor to be with you.
Thank you. Can you give us the promotion code once more? Or if they want to get a reading with you? Said for the next 2 weeks you were running a promotion for your readings, and the promotion code was?
It's HD, as in Hotel Delta, HD 20, HD 20, and you just put the coupon code in my website, evolvinghumandesign.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.